Welcome everybody to this Protocols.io webinar. I'm very excited that you're all here today. My name is Anita Brollox and I'm the head of outreach at Protocols.io, and today's webinar will be an introduction to Protocols.io, and then the second part is what I call the art of writing protocols, because really there's an art to write reproducible protocols. Just before we get started, a couple notes. We are recording this webinar, so just please be aware of that if you're asking any questions. If you want to ask questions, there is a chat functionality here in the Zoom, so feel free to use that, or you can also unmute yourself and ask questions. I might need a little bit of help for the people of you who are in the room, because I don't see you, so I don't know if you have a question. So I think we can just, maybe Antonella can help to send the questions or something. And yeah, so please feel free to ask questions as we go along. If there's anything that's unclear, feel free to interrupt me. And we also have time to answer questions between both of the parts. So yeah, so there will be plenty of time to ask questions. And also, I think we will be sharing these slides afterwards. So I think we'll send out a link to the slides, so you'll have the slides afterwards as well. And yeah, so let's get started. The workshop today, as I said, it's two parts. The first part is an introduction to Protocols.io, where I'll go over our mission of Protocols.io, and I'll show you some of the main functionalities on the site, and then I'll show you also some examples. And then the second part, the art of writing protocols, we have a little hands-on drawing kind of exercise. So if you have a paper and a pen ready for that, that would be great. And then also I'll show you some best practices for writing reproducible methods and show you some examples. But I would actually, so this part one is introduction to Protocols.io, and I would like to start this with a question actually for all of you guys. And that is, have you ever had trouble reproducing the work of someone else, or maybe even your own work? If the people who are on the chat here, if they want to type, or if you want to unmute yourself, or maybe somebody in the room. I don't know, does it work with the people in the room? Can we hear everybody, or is that not possible?
So there is someone from the chat. Yeah. I guess we all had, me included.
Okay, and Nicholas said we all had.
Yeah. Yes, everyone.
Everyone, okay. So also, Rocky, our scientist raccoon, he also had some trouble. So he's our scientist, and he has his first day in a new lab, and he's super excited to start his first experiment. So as he is planning his first experiment, because this is something he has never worked with it previously, so he's planning his first experiment. So he's like, okay, let me check what the previous postdoc did. So he takes out the lab notebooks and he starts, he wants to find it, but then it turns out actually the lab notebook from the previous postdoc is lost. So he's like, oh, well, and nobody from the lab knows where it went. Maybe the postdoc took it with him, or maybe, yeah, nobody knows where it really is. So Rocky really decides, okay, well, let's read some papers. He gets out all the papers and he starts reading the methods and materials sections. And then he reads things like, we did what reference 45 did. He goes to that reference says, we did what others did. And then he's like, well, how did others do this? And then he finds the original paper, and that says we did this with conventional methods. So he kind of has to start from scratch for his first experiments. And the problem really that we're trying to address with Protocols.io is the problem of research reproducibility, because oftentimes it's actually very hard to repeat or build upon previously published work. And one of the reasons is often the lack of detailed recipes describing how the research and experiments were performed. And yeah, so our mission at Protocols.io is to make it easy for scientists to share method details before, during, and after publication. And how we do this is, so I'll show you our main functionalities. So Protocols.io we are an open access repository of methods. We have about 6,000 public protocols right now, and they are in a large diversity of disciplines. And to discover publications, and this is actually the part, if you have a laptop, I don't know if you brought a laptop, and if you already signed into protocols.io, feel free to browse along and also check all these things out on the site. So these are just screenshots, but I might also show you some of the things on the live site later. But up here, you will see a search window where if you're searching for methods, you would put the keyword, or you put the method title that you're looking for, and then you hit enter or this little search icon, and then you would get a whole list of results that match with that keyword. And then from those results, you can pick whatever looks good. And then when you click on a method, you will notice that, so this is what the protocols on protocols.io look like. And the special thing is that they are not PDFs, so they're not static PDFs, but they're interactive and dynamic protocols. So there are a lot of things happening here, and I'll walk you through the elements that you can see now. So you will notice that every public protocol receives the DOI, so it can be cited. You can include it in your paper, in your manuscript. And then also, if you are publishing a paper and you decide to include your protocol in your materials and methods section, we do link back to the paper. So it's like a back and forth link. The paper links to the detailed protocol, and we link back to the paper. And then down here, you can see what is the first step of a step-by-step description of the method. So we encourage people to enter the protocols not as long, hard to understand text, but rather easy to follow step-by-step descriptions. And you can also see that here the methods can be grouped into sections. So here you can see the first section of in the first step. And then also there's a lot of room to add additional details, such as you can add an abstract, guidelines, you can add very detailed materials, so you can include exactly the reagents that you used with the vendor and the catalog number and all these details that are very important. And then also protocols can be associated with groups. And we have something that we call the works for me button. So if you're finding methods on protocols.io and you're deciding whether this is something you want to give it a try or not, the works for me button is an indicator of how many people tried this method and then they clicked works for me. So you can click on this 5 here, and then you would get a list of all the people that said that it worked for them. So sometimes that can help you to validate a method. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the commenting functionality. And so the commenting functionality really happens on 2 levels. One, we call it a protocol level. So this is if somebody has a question, comment, suggestion, whatever on the protocol as a whole. Or there's also step level comments. So if somebody has a question or suggestion or comment on one specific step of the protocol, they can also add step level comments. And then we also have version control. So it's really important for us to make it easy for scientists to always share any improvements or updates, corrections that need to be made to methods. So every protocol, you can create new versions. And then everybody who's using a protocol will always be guided to the newest version, but also the previous versions will be preserved. So you can always go back and see what changed between different versions. Yeah, and there's also like this compare functionality. So you could actually click compare, and then there's like a highlighting functionality that shows you, that kind of highlights the differences between version 1 and version 2. And then also, of course, you can export protocols as a PDF directly to your computer or Dropbox, Google Drive, Box, or to OneDrive. And then also every protocol has a run button. And so the run button is for when you're in the lab ready to follow this method, you can click run. And that gives you a checklist-like functionality where you can check off every single step as you complete it. And that can be done either on the web or on our free Android and iOS mobile apps. So you could have it on your tablet or phone or whatever you're using. And then every step that you check off, it will get a timestamp. And then you can also add notes or images, comments, and everything that you do gets timestamped. And then in the very end, you have like an experiment record. So it's kind of like an electronic lab notebook record that you receive after you're done with this experiment run. And then that can be shared, or you can print it, or whatever you want to do with it. You can archive it. And then also, protocols can be forked. And I have a little description here of what it means to fork a protocol. So there's 3 different really things that can be done with a protocol. People can copy protocols, but that's only for the person who created it. And if you're finding somebody else's method, but you use it in maybe a slight modification, you might be using a slight modification of it, you can create what we call a fork. So you can kind of take this other person's protocol and then modify it to your needs. And then that will be linked to the original protocol, but it's kind of your version of this other protocol. And then the version control that I showed earlier is also only for the person who created a protocol, so they can keep it up to date. So those are the differences. And when you're creating protocols, it's really simple. There's just a button that just says new protocol. And then when you click that button, our protocol editor opens up. And this is our protocol editor. You can see up here, we have a bunch of just general text editor tools. So you can have some formatting, and you can include, of course, videos and images to every step. You can link out to different things. You can add warnings. And so there's a whole bunch of different tools. And then on the right-hand side here, we have what we call the components. There are a lot of wet lab components, but there's also for computational workflow, so you can link out to the data set, you can put command lines. There's a lot of these components, but the components really are useful for, so for example, when you're using the mount component and then later you're using the running functionality, and the mount component will allow you to scale a protocol. So let's say you might be making a buffer or something, and then you might want to scale it. Like if you had like this example, you want to scale it by 3, then it will tell you 60 microliters instead of 20. Or for the duration, if you have the timers, when you're running the protocol, there will be automatic timers. So it's really good to use the components when you're creating your protocols. And then also in the protocol editing, you will also see the comments. So what I showed you on the public protocol, of course, everything can also happen on the private side. So when you're creating the protocol and you're sharing it with others, you can also use these comments on the private side. And then there's also an editing history, so you can see exactly what kind of changes have been made to a protocol by who and when. So here you can see, for example, this is an example of a history log. So you can see exactly what has been done. And when you created a protocol, you can share it privately. So every time you create a protocol, it starts out privately. So you're the only person who can see it. And then you have different, so it's really up to you at what point you want to share it with others privately or when you want to publish it. But it always starts out private. And if you want to share it privately with others, there are multiple options. So one, so when you're sharing it, there will be like a button that's just called share. When you're sharing it, you can either get a shareable link. This is kind of like a link that you can send to anybody, and they can view the protocol even if they don't have an account on protocols.io. Or if you want to share it with somebody who does have an account, you can either share it with individuals or with groups. So I'll talk a little bit later what a group is. But basically, if your lab has a group, you can share it with everybody at once rather than sharing it with each individual. And then there are different access levels you can give to different people or different groups. So one is you can allow them to only view a protocol, or you can allow them to also edit a protocol, or you can allow them to edit and publish, or you can make somebody a co-admin. So there are different options. And when you're ready to publish protocols, you will see 2 orange buttons. And one is called Get DOI, and one is called Publish. And so the main difference really is, so both of these buttons will give your protocol a DOI, but the difference is that the Get DOI option kind of is for when you're submitting a manuscript and you want to include the DOI in your materials and methods section. And so that way the reviewers can see the protocol, but you might want to keep the protocol hidden until your paper's out. This will be the option you should go with, because when you get the DOI, when you only get the DOI, you can include it in your manuscript, but the protocol will be hidden. So that means if somebody tries to find it, or if they try to search for it in Google or wherever, they will not be able to see it yet. And then once the paper is published, then we will publish also your protocol. So I guess it depends. If you're publishing in an open access journal, we will detect once your paper is published, and then we will publish your protocol. And if you're publishing in a non-open access journal, then after your paper is out, you can come back in and then you can make it fully public yourself. And then if you click the publish button, that's for when you're right away ready to make it fully public. So your protocol will get a DOI, and it will be fully available. Everybody can find it, people can comment on it, and yeah, it will be fully discoverable by the scientific community. So just to keep these two options in mind when you're ready to publish protocols. And then also when you're publishing, there's like this publishing flow. So we ask you to put a title, of course, the authors, and then also the third point is we ask you for the status of a protocol. So that means we let you decide what the status of a protocol is. So that might mean you can say this is a protocol we've been using and it works great, or maybe you can say this is something we're still developing, or you can even see there's even protocols that say this is something we tried but it didn't work, but you might still want to share it because it might never make it into a paper. So it's really up to you at what point you want to share a protocol. And then you can also associate it with groups here. So here I just had like an example. If you're part of groups, you will see the groups down here, but you can always associate it with groups afterwards as well. And then once the protocol is public, it receives the DOI, so it has a citation. It can be added to your manuscript. We do archive all public protocols with clocks to ensure long-term preservation, and it can be added to public groups. And people might start discussing your protocol. They might fork protocols to modify to their need. And there's the commenting functionality that I showed earlier, and you can keep it up to date with versioning. So if you keep working on that method and there's some improvements or corrections you need to make to it, you can always keep it up to date with versions. And then collaboration. So collaboration on protocols.io happens mainly through groups. And this is an example of the Human Cell Atlas group. And I'll actually see if I can show you this. So this is what it looks on the live side. So there's like a timeline where you really just see all the things that are happening in this group, if somebody new joins or if a new protocol is published. And then you can also browse publications. So here you can browse by you can sort by different things, such as state, activity name, and there's also categories. So you can kind of organize them by different categories. And then you can also look through the members, so you see who's part of this group. And there are discussions and resources. And so the groups are really the best way to collaborate, and the groups can be either visible groups. So that means if you're creating a group, it will be visible for everybody. So this is a visible group, or you can also make it invisible if you don't want others to see your group. And then there's also different access, different invitation levels. So you can, for example, say everybody should be able to join my group, or it should be by invitation only, or it should be by request. So when you're setting up a group, you'll see all these different options. But groups are great for big communities, or also for individual labs and individual smaller groups, or for like a group of collaborators. Yeah, so those things. And then also every group has a group folder, and the group folder, I can actually click on it real quick. The group folder is the space that's only visible for the group members. And the group folder, if it loads, here's where you can share protocols, but you can also share any other files. So if you have any spreadsheets or PDFs or anything else, that can be also shared here. and then you can organize it in any kind of way that you would like to organize it. You can create subfolders and kind of arrange everything however you need it. And then also another thing that we added recently is called tasks. So this is more for if you have a lab group, you can organize the different tasks what everybody's working on within the group. And this is what it looks like. So you basically can create different schedules for different things, and it kind of gives you an overview to see who's working on what and what they're doing. And then if there's protocols attached to a task, you can run those protocols, and then they will turn into those protocol records that I talked about earlier. So that's the task manager. And then last but not least, our file manager. So the file manager is really where all your files are, all your protocols are here, but also all the other files that you're adding to your file manager. So as I mentioned earlier, you can really add any other files here too, if it's spreadsheets, PDFs, or Word documents, whatever it is. And then here's where you can also kind of have all the commands, so you can move things around by dragging and dropping it. You can export protocols, you can share it. Really in the file manager is everything you need to do. You can also run from here, and yeah, all these things. But as I mentioned in the beginning, our mission is to make it easy to share method details before, during, and after publication. But I also really want to mention here that protocols.io can save scientists time even long before publication. So if you're using protocols.io before you're ready to publish, if you then are publishing, it's literally a click of a button. You can get a DOI for your methods, and it's really can save you time while you're developing the method as well. And one thing that I wanted to share as an example, what can happen if all the methods are in one central place, or one central repository, is actually very exciting. So this is a tweet from somebody who was looking for an RNA extraction protocol for cortical neuron cultures. And then there's like this thread, and then somebody suggested, I'd say sort of from all the protocols on protocols.io, she was suggesting to use this one. It's like a trisol protocol. And if you look at what's very interesting, if you look at where this protocol came from, it's from a paper on stickleback fish parasites. So it has nothing to do with cortical neuron cultures. So it's really exciting here to see is that if all the protocols are in one central repository, you might also enable somebody who's not directly from your field to also use methods in a different way. So, or you might discover things that you might have not discovered in any other way. And yeah, I want to finish this part with just saying that there's a growing number of organizations encouraging the use of protocols.io. There are more than 500 journals now that added us to their author guidelines and recommending protocols.io to the authors for their manuscript submission. And there's a lot of funders who are encouraging their grantees to use protocols.io. And also more and more institutions are getting campus-wide licenses and encourage their researchers to use protocols.io for more reproducible science. And this is the end of my first part. And I'll be happy to answer any questions now if there are any questions. So feel free to unmute yourself or type the questions, whatever works.
From our room, there are no questions for now.
Okay. Any questions from anybody else who's dialing in? Okay.
Okay, we have a question.
So if I got it right, you cannot copy a protocol
Sorry, can you
Yeah, you come, because we don't have a microphone, sorry.
Okay.
So if I got it right, is it that you cannot copy a protocol unless you are the original author of the protocol?
So the question is, well, if you're not the original author for protocol, if you can still share it?
Not sharing. Sometimes you want to copy and then edit it to suit,
Right.
modify it to suit you in your lab. Not that you are going to publish it as your own.
Right. So that's a really
You
good
cite
question.
this protocol in the long run.
Right, so that's a really good question. And what we have done at protocols.io is we kind of separate the authors from the contact person. So if you, for example, you're finding somebody's protocol and you're using it, but you didn't develop it, you could put yourself as the contact person because you're currently working with that method, but you can put whoever developed it. If you know who developed it, you can put them as the authors. And so that's how you can do it. And then also what's very interesting, so I'm not a legal person or anything, but so a lot of people are concerned about like copyright and those kind of things. And what's actually very interesting is that apparently recipes and methods are not protected by copyright. So I guess legally you'd be okay to, even if somebody published it, and if you want to publish only the method part, of course you cannot publish the entire manuscript and copy like the discussion part and the results, but if it's only the methods itself, you can share that. And yeah, so you can put whoever is the author, if you know who the author is, and you can put yourself as the contact person. And then also if you're publishing and then maybe one day somebody wants to take over that protocol, you can always transfer the ownership of a protocol. But the author field, once it's published, cannot be modified, but the contact person can always change. And also, if you don't know, if you have a protocol that's just like laying around in your lab since forever and it just kind of came out of the lab, you could also put like the lab name, for example, as the author, because maybe you don't know who exactly developed it. Does that answer the question?
Not really. So my question was, I saw the run tab where you can run and then you can give you a checklist of what you need to do in preparation for the experiment, something like that. But my question is, you want to copy the protocol. It's like you've read an article and they've given the protocol there and you want to copy and adapt it to suit what you are doing in your lab.
Right.
Is it possible?
Right, so for that, I think the fork functionality would be good. So the fork, what I showed earlier, if you fork a protocol, you can copy the protocol and you can modify it to your needs, but it will always have like a little note that says this protocol was forked from this and this protocol. So it kind of always links back to the original protocol, but you can modify it to your needs so it fits for whatever you're doing and for your lab. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And there is a question from the chat.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Nicholas, do you want to say a little bit more about this? I don't really understand. If you want to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Is the voice okay?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, my question I have is, so this is like a nice way to get in an electronic form protocols that usually you tend to keep on paper and which are not always easy to, let's say, work and share with. One of the questions I have is it possible to use this platform for integrating this protocol into like a laboratory manager system? There are like commercial LIMS which are available, which allow you, for example, to take some specific information here from a protocol for example, keeping up to date your inventory or ordering material or making the calendar of the working week of a coworker. Is there any function which helps a bit the integration of these data into such kind of programs?
Right, so we have an open API, but I'm not a technical person, but I can send you a link afterwards too, and you can check it out. And I can also connect you to our developers if there's anything that's unclear, but you should be able to do all these things with the open API.
All right, so basically you supported the import of the data via whatever technical trick. Okay.
Right. So you should also, if you go to the protocols.io site, on the very bottom, there's like a developer tab, and then you can click there and you'll find all the information you need on that.
All right, all good.
Yeah. Or if you can also email me later if you have any more detailed technical questions about that. But it should be possible, yes.
Okay.
And then there's another question, how widely is protocols.io used for computational biology workflows? And so there are a bunch of people using it already, and it's very exciting. Of course, we always welcome more, but yeah, there's a lot of people already using it for computational workflows. And I can also maybe share more examples of that afterwards as well, if you're interested. Cool. Are there any more questions before we move on to the next part? Okay, I think if there are more questions later, I'm also happy to answer any more questions about this later. But so for our next part, the art of writing protocols, if you have a paper and a pen out, maybe we can give it a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. And if you would like to follow this drawing protocol, we can do a little test. So I don't know if you guys have like a paper and pen ready, but if you want to, so this is a protocol, it's not a scientific protocol, of course, but it's a protocol to draw an image. And if you would like to follow these steps to draw an image, it will be really interesting to see what the results are. So maybe we can give it like 2 or 3 minutes so everybody can try to draw an image by following these steps. Do people have pen and papers in the room?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay, cool. So maybe we can give it like, I think 3 minutes should be good. How's it looking? Do people need one more minute?
Yes, one more minute.
Okay. Okay. One more minute, or people are done?
People in the room are done? Okay, we are done in the room.
Okay, cool. So now what you can do is, maybe if you guys want to hold up your drawings to see if they look all alike, you can do that. And then I guess the people who are in the chat, unfortunately you cannot see it. If you want, I guess you could also share your video, but you don't have to. Whatever you want to do works.
Yes, SpongeBob.
Okay, sounds like you made pretty pictures. So you think it's SpongeBob? So I guess, so I did this before with the other workshop participants, and yeah, the outcomes were very funny. All of them looked a little bit different, and I guess what we want to say with this year, like everybody follows the same result, the same protocol, but we get as many people as we have in a room, different results. And as you guessed right, this was a description that I wrote for drawing SpongeBob. And I guess what I want to say here is, even though everybody had the same instructions, not everybody understands the instructions in the same way, right? And what I mentioned earlier, the way we communicate methods, oftentimes in papers we read, we did this with conventional methods, but even if there is a description of the method, it's really unclear. And so this is a very, I guess it's very exaggerated, but this is an interesting article somebody wrote, and they said, well, if you look at a paper on how to draw an owl, if you look at the method section to how to draw an owl, it could read something like this. We draw the owl on 60.2 GMS white paper of the A4 dimension using 3H and 6B graphite pencils. We did so by looking at owls and drawing what we saw on paper. This protocol yielded one drawn owl. So of course, it's, as I said, it's very exaggerated, but oftentimes in the method sections, we really do we just don't get all the information that is actually critical to follow the experiment, and there's a lot of things just missing. Sometimes maybe people just assume that somebody knows something, or I don't know, but there's really a lot of times not enough detail. And so what I really want to say here with this is that even if you do have protocols.io or a platform, or if you are sharing your method, just because you share something, it's not enough. So even if you use protocols.io, it's not enough to just put your method there. You really have to think about if others can also understand what you are sharing. So just because you shared something, if you didn't put an effort into writing the recipe in a way that others can follow it, it doesn't mean that people can use it. So as this part of the workshop is called the art of writing protocols, is really, it's not that easy to actually write a method that others will understand, because a lot of times things might be obvious to you, but if you give it to an undergrad student who's never worked with it before, it's not obvious to them, right? So you really have to think about what are all the details that are actually important for everybody who's using this method. And one thing, so here's kind of my best practices for writing reproducible method. And one, the first point is actually very important. It's really important that your methods are digital. And it doesn't really matter where they are digital, but it's really important that they are not on a paper lab notebook only. And about paper lab notebooks, so they're actually in use since the 15th century. And at that time, they were great because it's always great to document things. But there's a lot of issues with paper lab notebooks, and they're not. So one is they're not searchable. They can easily be damaged or misplaced. It's really hard to actually back up things. And it's really hard to share anything from a paper lab notebook. So it's better to have your protocols digital. And there are multiple reasons. If anybody wants to name some of the reasons why you think your protocols should be digital, feel free to name a couple. Does anybody have any ideas?
Easy to copy and paste from the room.
Okay, good one, yes.
I would add also for longevity, that they don't get lost.
Right.
Well,
They will be available longer. It's a good one. So I have a couple of reasons here, but there's actually an endless list of reasons. But one is, yeah, it's searchable. It's easy to copy and paste, as you mentioned, and they will be available for longer. And it's also very easy, or much easier, to back up data, because it's actually very important to always back up your things. So you can export the data as PDFs and back it up on multiple places. And it's very easy to share protocols. You can embed high resolution images. You can access it from all over the world, and you can also use mobile apps to quickly upload images or other things. So it's really, there's a lot of benefits to having your protocols digital. So yeah, I really encourage you to not only have them on paper lab notebooks. If you do still like to have paper lab notebooks, I guess that's okay, but as long as you have the important stuff digital as well. And so the other thing is, for really, if you're writing a protocol, I kind of try to encourage people to think of a protocol as a brief, modular, self-contained scientific publication, because that's really what it is. And one thing, for example, that's really important is to include an abstract for your methods. So just a couple sentences, if it's just 3 or 4 sentences in the beginning, that just puts your method into context. It's really, really helpful, because you never know who might pick up this method in a couple of years, or maybe yourself even, and you don't, if you pick it up like 15 years later, you might not remember immediately what you used this for. So it's just really important to put a little bit of abstract to just tell others or tell the readers what this method is all about, and it will make it much more clear if the reader doesn't know what this is about. So yeah, think about it of its own little publication, because that's really what it is. And also try to include as much detail as possible. So that means, as we saw earlier, try to put exactly the duration and time. So don't just say, then after I incubated something, tell exactly, you should say, how long did you incubate, at what temperature, and all these things. It's really important. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that just like to leave these details out. And also it's important to tell people exactly what reagent amount you used of something, and also where the reagent was from. So you should put exactly the vendor names, the catalog numbers, because there's really stories where people are trying to reproduce somebody else's method, and it doesn't work because they got this one reagent from a different vendor. And then once they switch it out, then suddenly it works. So it's actually very important to let others know which exact regions you used. And also, it's very, very helpful to include images and videos in your protocols. I think there's this saying that goes like, an image says more than 1,000 words or something. And a lot of times for protocols, this is really true, because if you're trying to explain something with words, as we saw in the SpongeBob drawing exercise, it can be really difficult to describe things with words. So if you put like an image, or if you include little videos, it doesn't have to be like super fancy videos. If you just record it with a cell phone or something, that's totally enough. But it really makes it more clear to others what you're trying to say, and it supports your written text. And then also it's helpful to let the reader know about expected results, not only in the very end of the protocol, but also if there's anything that they should be expecting throughout the protocol, you can let them know so they know that they're on the right track. And then you can also include different things such as safety informations. And then also, if you're doing computational protocols, of course, what software did you use, what code did you use, and all these things. So really try to put as much detail as possible. And then another thing that's very important is to keep the steps in a chronological order. So don't try to mix up the order, because it really is confusing and it makes it harder to follow something. And then also try to limit jargon and use an active voice. So oftentimes in methods, I think we try to make it sound maybe different from something else, or we try extra hard to make it sound like very special, but it's actually very good to just be really clear. And if you did something the same way that somebody else did it, you don't have to try to formulate it in a different way just so it sounds different. If you just do the same thing, just like say what you did. So yeah, so don't try to overcomplicate things. And also it's very important, or it's really helpful to use active voice. So let the reader know exactly what they have to do instead of saying what has been done to the sample. And then when you're publishing a protocol, this is more for making your protocol discoverable on protocols.io. Add keywords, because the keywords are what we're searching for when people are searching for protocols. So add all the keywords that are describing your method. And then also, please add any additional notes, recipes, tips, and tricks. So anything that's really might seem obvious to you and you think, oh, this is like too much information, I think it's a good idea to put it as an additional note for others. And then also one thing that's actually very helpful is to get feedback from others. So if you're done writing a method, I think it's a good idea to give it to somebody else, maybe even somebody like one of your friends or colleagues who's not working with the exact same method. And you can give them the method, or you can give them the protocol, and you can ask them if they will be able to follow this method with all the given information. So this is really a good way to get feedback, to see if others would be able to understand, and you might get really good feedback from that, and people will tell you, oh, I don't understand this step, and then it will help you to add more detail. So try to get feedback from others. And here are some examples of what good method details looks like. As I mentioned in the very beginning here, add an abstract. So here you can see this is like an abstract. It's just a little short paragraph that just lets the reader know what this method is about. And then also try to have clear step descriptions. So don't try to make it overly full. Like here you can see it's really simple, easy steps to follow. And then images and videos. Here on the left-hand side, this is one of our users. She's publishing these really beautiful protocols with these kind of images that she's actually making in with PowerPoint. So you don't have to have any fancy like tools or whatever. You can use PowerPoint to just like help to support your protocol with nice visuals. Or here on the right-hand side, this is actually one of my favorite protocols. Somebody published this protocol, and on step 3 here, it said like grind tissue. And he got so many comments where people asked like, how do you do this? How do you do this? And then he published now a new version where he included a video of how he's grinding this tissue. And so now people can understand it better. So he had a lab mate just film him grinding the tissue. And now it's very obvious what he's trying to do here. And then also again, we give you all the space to add all the detailed reagents and equipment. So here you can see like people are adding exactly catalog numbers and vendors. And for equipment, the same thing. You can put exactly what kind of centrifuge did you use, which shaker did you use, what, like all the equipment that you use, because those things are also sometimes very critical to make or break a method. So if somebody is using a different shaker, it might not work for them anymore. And then it's really hard to figure out why a method doesn't work anymore. So add all these things. And then also, again, the keywords are really important for if you're publishing the method because it makes it more discoverable. And on groups, so as I mentioned before, groups are a great way to collaborate, but also groups are a great way to make protocols more discoverable. So there are a lot of different groups also in different research fields, and you might find your interests, your research interests on protocols.io, but if there's any group that you think should exist and for methods and it doesn't exist yet, feel free to also create a group. So you can create a community and encourage people to share their methods in that community. And then if you're part of this group, you will always stay updated of any new protocols that are added. And yeah, you can share your protocol in there as well. And here's just my reproducible method checklist. So just again, make sure it's digital. Make sure you add a little abstract to put it into context, and also tell others what the status of your protocol is. So is it something you're working on, or is it something that's working? Is it something that you're still developing? Is this something you're trying but it hasn't worked so far? And then also add enough detail, again, add images and videos because they're really, really helpful. They're really, I think the images and videos are really the most powerful thing you can add to a method because it just makes such a big difference. And also add all the exact reagent details, equipment details, computational tools that you used, timers and other components, use active voice, keep the steps in a chronological order, the keywords, and really add any tips and notes that are helpful for that method. So with that, I'm at the end of the second part, and if there are any questions about this, I'm happy to answer any questions on that part, or if there's any more questions that came up about protocols.io itself, I'm also happy to answer those now as well.